Hello guys and welcome back. So today we are discussing a solved case about a beautiful family from New South Wales regarding a case that has been described as one of the worst cases to ever happen in Australia. And it's a case that has left many, myself included, asking why? Why did this happen? And could anything have been done to prevent such a terrible crime from occurring? Once again, I'll remind you guys that my videos are now available in a podcast format. I'll leave that in the top comment or the links if you want to listen on the go. But having said all of that, let's get into today's case. So as I said, today we are heading to New South Wales, to the small rural town of Lockhart, which is located roughly halfway between Sydney and Melbourne and has a population of about 800 people. There on a farm called Watch Hill Farm lived the Hunt family. We have the husband and wife, Jeff, who was 44, and Kim, who was 41, who really were considered this really beautiful, happy, and very much in love couple. They were both into their sports and were very active people, and both smart and motivated individuals who were both very likable, very much popular and liked in their community. And they both had very outgoing and sociable personalities, which all these factors I think made them a really great couple by the sounds of it. Kim was caring by nature, which is why she made such an incredible intensive care nurse. And in her spare time, she loved to cook, garden, and ride horses. And her husband was a golf enthusiast who worked hard as a canola farmer, and he ran this farm with his brother Alan. Although their marriage had faced a number of difficulties, which I will get into in just a moment, it seems like they had really stuck together through all of these difficulties and challenges and were just coming out the other side of everything happier and stronger than ever. Then of course we have their 3 children whom they both absolutely adored. We have their oldest son, Fletcher, who was 10 years old and described as energy personified. He was also a very talented and passionate football player. Then we have Mia, who was 8 years old, the quintessential middle child, very caring, a lover of music and the arts, and like her mum, she enjoyed cooking. And the youngest child was little Phoebe. She enjoyed water skiing. In fact, she had just been learning to water ski, very active and into her sports like the rest of the family. And despite her baby of the family status, she was also described as the bossiest child. All 3 children attended the local St. Joseph's School, which had a total of 74 students at the time, just to give you an idea of how small Lockhart was or is. And little side note, every time I say in my videos small town, someone in the comments is triggered. Listen, I live in Perth and I call Perth a small town, and we have about 1.9 million people living here. So just assume that any town with under 2 million people living in it is going to be called a small town by me. I'm sorry if that makes someone mad. It definitely will. But anyway, comment down below if you're from a small town or from Perth. Anyway, so the place where the family lived, which as I mentioned was Watch Hill Farm, really was the perfect place to raise a young family. It had lush green lawns, yellow canola fields, and beautiful gardens. A great place for, young kids to run around and explore and just have a great childhood. And the Hunt family were a very much liked and respected family in the community, in the area. They both had very respectable jobs, a nurse, a farmer, so they contributed to their community. And they were also known for locally volunteering and helping out where they could. So let's skip ahead to the event that would change the Hart family forever. In 2012, Kim was in a horrific car accident that caused her car to flip over twice, and she actually nearly lost her life. She was placed in a medically induced coma following the crash, and her husband Jeff would remain by her side the entire time she was in this coma. Kim was eventually brought out of this coma, but her biggest challenges were really yet to come. The recovery process from her injuries and from the crash was brutal, to say the least. She had to learn to do simple tasks again, like walking, talking, and eating. But Jeff really was there for every step of her recovery process and really did receive a lot of praise for not only, of course, sticking by his wife's side, but being there for her at every twist and turn, no matter how difficult it was. And of course, Kim herself was incredibly determined to get better and try to get back to as much normalcy in their life as possible. And although Kim did make incredible progress in her recovery process, realistically, she never was the same person again. Kim was left with permanent brain and spinal injuries that not only altered her ability to do day-to-day tasks, but really altered her entire personality. Post-accident, she grew tired very easily, she lost her temper very easily, especially at Jeff, and she really struggled to look after 3 children who were quite young at the time. And I'm sure, for the strongest and toughest of us, looking after 3 young children is a challenge, but after what she had been through, I cannot begin to imagine how difficult it would have been to try to run a household and look after children. And then, of course, there was her beloved job as a nurse that she was forced to leave, which was incredibly devastating to her. And let's not forget to mention the emotional trauma that would come out of being in such a serious car crash and almost losing your life. That wasn't really talked about in any of the news articles I read, but I can only imagine that she was suffering from some level of trauma. As I said, Kim's personality really did change, and that reflected back on Kim and Jeff's marriage because, of course, not only were they now struggling with this new adjustment to a new life, and Kim was out of work, she was still in the recovery process, but as I said, her temper was now very short due to no fault of her own, and this was difficult on Jeff as well. We can't forget that as much as Kim suffered, I'm sure Jeff also did suffer, as well as the kids. And Jeff's friends and family actually witnessed him having several breakdowns during this time due to the stress and due to financial stresses as well. And I really do want to touch on the financial stresses point for just 1 minute, because that will come up a few times in this video. From what I understand, the financial stresses that they were under they did have some issues with finances, but they were surviving. They had enough money to survive, to eat and have a roof over their head and support the family still. And maybe things were not as they once were, but the farm was still making money. It did sound like Jeff was stressed over a lot of farming related issues, and I know nothing about farming. I believe it can be a very stressful job or industry, but he was stressed about harvesting season and the potential to not make money, and it was just a culmination of things for Jeff that really led him to having those multitude of breakdowns. But again, obviously Kim was also going through her own stuff, so much so that she actually told a psychologist that she wished she had died in this car crash. And because of this, all of the rifles were actually removed from the farm, but the rifles were soon returned to the farm. I don't know why they were returned so soon. Perhaps they needed them for something, or they deemed Kim recovered from this way of thinking. But either way, her headspace for a time was bad, very, very bad, both of them. And then there was the effect that it had on the kids. Of course, they missed their mother terribly when she was away in hospital, but even when she got back, they had to adjust to not only the fact that their mother was kind of a different person, but I doubt they really even understood why she was a different person. They were young kids. How do you grapple with that? And as a result, they did have a few behavioural issues, which I'm sure, again, added even more strain on the family as a whole. So I hope I have adequately explained just how much this car crash impacted the entire Hunt family, every single member, for different reasons. I just wanted to emphasize that point and discuss it before we get into the following events, because it was a very poignant moment in this family's life. And I do want to say that they were on the up and up. As I said at the beginning, it seemed like they were just coming out of the other end of this dark period of their life. Kim had actually started working again. She was doing 8 hours a week as a nurse educator, so this really fulfilled her love of helping others. And she was actually also giving regular talks on road safety and also educational talks about brain injuries. On top of that, the family had hired a disability support worker named Lorraine Burke, who really helped out Kim with her day-to-day tasks, and I'm sure that really did make a big difference for the family. So by August of 2014, which was about 2 years post-crash, it seemed like the Hunt family were almost back to normal. That month they were visiting Kim's sister Jenny for her daughter's 4th birthday. And by the way, Kim and Jenny were apparently very close. And Jenny noticed that the family were just as they had been a couple of years ago. Kim, Jeff and the kids appeared, in her words, so happy, as if this crash had not occurred, besides the fact that Kim did still have a bit of a limp. But besides that, they were just one big happy family. And this birthday party really was just all laughs, happy smiles and hugs, and Jenny would have had no idea that this was the last time that she would ever see her sister again. So now we're going to skip ahead to Monday, September 8, 2014, which was, as we often tend to say, a day like any other. Well, almost. That morning, Kim drove the kids to meet the school bus, and she also had her care worker, Lorraine, over to help her out with tasks around the home for the day. At around 3:30 that afternoon, the kids returned home, and Fletcher, the oldest boy, in particular, had had a bit of a rough day. So that weekend that had just gone, which was Father's Day, by the way, his father had actually umpired a football game that he had been playing in. And apparently his father had ruled in favour of him. And whether this had been favouritism or not, which, it probably wasn't, the kids started saying that his dad, Jeff, was a cheater. And they did start picking on Fletcher a bit because of this. Actually, more precisely, they were saying to Fletcher, Jeff Hunt is you can fill in the blank of what that unfavourable word is that rhymes with Hunt. I don't want to get demonetized. I probably will anyway. But anyway, Kim did try to comfort her son and, say the kids would forget about this soon enough. And no doubt they definitely would have. Kids seem to move on from these silly little things pretty quick. In the evening, Jeff took all of the kids to visit his own parents, Lynette and John Hunt, while Kim and Lorraine stayed on the farm and did a bit of gardening together. However, Jeff's parents actually noticed that their son wasn't really himself on that particular day, later describing him as having no smiles that day. And they weren't the only ones to notice Jeff's unusual mood or attitude on that day. As I said, Jeff usually was relatively outgoing, relatively talkative, a relatively positive person considering all things he had gone through. And on this day, he was very quiet. He wasn't angry by the sounds of it or mad, but quiet and almost sad. So Lorraine also noticed, the care worker, noticed that Jeff was very quiet. Basically, Kim and Jeff had gotten into a bit of a tiff, which we will discuss in a minute, but they kind of did already often bicker a fair amount, a reasonable amount. And Jeff would often say to Kim, "That's enough, Kim," just to sort of maybe calm her down, shut her down. I'm not too sure. But on that day when Kim was going at him, he said nothing. And Lorraine found this very unusual. So much so that she actually asked Kim if Jeff was going through any sort of depressive episode, to which Kim said he wasn't. Kim did say to Lorraine, however, that an incident on the weekend had upset her. So what had happened was Jeff had gone to play golf by himself without the family, leaving her alone with the kids. Now, I'm sure that doesn't sound like a very big deal, and I don't have any further information on it, but this is how I'm gonna say it. I don't think anybody was right or wrong in this situation. My guess is that Jeff probably went to play golf for Father's Day by himself, a bit of a reprieve, a bit of a treat to himself. And Kim probably saw it as him not wanting to spend time with the family, leaving her alone with the 3 young children who, as I said, she somewhat struggled with, because even though she was so much better than she had been 2 years previous, she still did struggle. So I don't think anybody was right or wrong in this disagreement, but Kim was in quite the mood that day over it. And as I said, Jeff just wasn't responsive. Anyway, I have skipped ahead a little bit in the timeline of this evening. So Jeff got home that evening with the 3 children, and he actually made their dinners, sent them off for their showers, kind of got them ready for bed and made their lunches for the next day. And by around 7 p.m. that evening, Jeff and the kids had settled down on the couch to watch the soap opera here in Australia, Home and Away. And Kim kind of had an unusual response to Jeff doing this. She said to Lorraine, "Look at him, lazy and not doing anything." But he hadn't been lazy. He had made the kids dinners, sent them for their showers, got them, told them to get ready for bed, made their lunches for the following day. I'm just saying this because it's quite evident, or it was evident to Lorraine, that she was still very much upset about this golfing incident, and more so upset that Jeff was not acknowledging it. And Lorraine would later say that there was a lot of tension, a lot of tension in the air that evening. But at the same time, the couple were kind of known to argue, fight and bicker. So chances are she didn't think much of it. And as she was packing up after Home and Away finished at around 7:30, Lorraine didn't particularly give it a second thought. She said goodbye to the family. Phoebe ran up to her to give her a hug and a kiss goodbye. And Jeff shouted out, "Bye, Lainey. See you tomorrow." And there's just no way Lorraine or anybody could have known what events were about to unfold later that evening. So the following day, Lorraine arrived back on the family farm as she usually did, and as she approached the home, she was rather startled to see that Kim was lying on a path outside the home. And at first, Lorraine thought that perhaps Kim had taken a fall, so she rushed over to her. But as she got closer, she realized that Kim was not only motionless, but she was still dressed in her pajamas, and there was 2 jackets that belonged to Jeff covering her face. Lorraine slowly lifted the jackets off of Kim's face to find that Kim was deceased. She had been killed with a single gunshot wound to her head. And of course, Lorraine was shocked and horrified and immediately phoned emergency services. So when the ambulance officers arrived, they entered the home for whatever reason, and they actually very quickly spotted a spent cartridge from a gunshot in the hallway, and they were very quick to then leave the home because, for all they knew, the perpetrator, a gunman, was still at large, still on the property. So they decided to leave the home and wait outside for the police to arrive. And by the way, Lorraine was also still waiting on the farm at the property, despite the fact there was potential danger around for all she knew, because she wanted to wait for the children to get home and to make sure, well, they weren't going to be okay, but just to look after them, basically. And when the police arrived, they informed Lorraine that the kids had never been at school that day. And Lorraine got an incredibly sinking feeling in her stomach, and she just knew that something was terribly wrong. And as the police entered the Hunt family home, her worst fears were confirmed. All 3 children, Fletcher, Mia and Phoebe, were found dead in their beds, all having been killed as their mother had been with a single gunshot wound to the head. On the dining room table, a note was actually found, and it simply read, "I'm sorry, it's all my fault, totally mine." There was no signature, no further explanation, nothing. Just 8 simple words to explain this horrific, traumatic crime scene that had been stumbled upon. The only real question now was, where was Jeff Hunt, and had he been the one to commit these awful crimes? And the news of what had happened, what had been found on the farm, broke pretty quickly, particularly in the local community. And of course, everybody wanted to know, where was Jeff, and had he been the one to do these awful crimes, which, quite frankly, to locals was incomprehensible. Jeff was so well liked and considered such a good guy in the community. There was no way, right? The next day on the farm, police stumbled upon some tire tracks, and these tire tracks led them to a muddy dam located on the property. Police divers were called at this point, as this was a particularly large dam, and it wasn't long before the body of Jeff Hunt was found about 7 meters into the dam, along with a rifle. Jeff was found to have also died from a single gunshot wound to the top of his mouth, later found to be self-inflicted. And when handwriting experts examined this note that was found on the dining room table, it was confirmed to be the handwriting of Jeff Hunt. So let's briefly piece together what happened. It was either late on September 8 or in the early hours of September 9 that Jeff shot his wife Kim outside of the home. What were they doing outside? I don't know. We don't know and will potentially never know the details of what went down on that evening. Jeff then went inside, and as his kids lay asleep in their beds, he shot them one by one. After this, he got into his ute, drove down to the dam, walked into the water, shoved the rifle in his mouth, and pulled the trigger. An early public speculation actually theorized that Kim had been the one to kill the children, and Jeff, who was so angry and distraught over what his wife did, killed Kim because of what she did, and so devastated over his entire family being taken out, killed himself. And I think this theory sort of was created because truly the locals could not comprehend that good guy Jeff, local farmer Jeff, family man Jeff, could not only kill his wife, but kill his children as well. And by the way, there was no history of domestic violence in this family, none that was ever reported, or none that Kim ever spoke of, and none that we are aware of. And despite all the struggles this family had been through, they really seem to have come out stronger and better and happier than ever, as I said before. I mean, this case really did hit the town of Lockhart very hard. Not only was Jeff very popular and well liked, but he was the local farmer. He umpired kids' football. He volunteered in the community. And unfortunately, people did like Kim, but I think a lot of people wanted to shift the blame onto her somehow, and they did, which I'll discuss in a minute. But truly, researching this case, it was shocking to me how much sympathy Jeff Hunt received after even it was proven he committed these crimes. And he received this sympathy from locals, friends, family, the media, the community, like everyone. Even, it's such a strange case because nobody really saw this man as evil. They saw him as somebody that was suffering, and I have no doubt that he was. He had to have been going through something to do what he did. But I don't care if you've been a saint your whole life, if you were a nun or a priest. Okay, priest, terrible example, but I don't care how good you were in your life, from the day you were born up until the age of whatever, if you commit one terrible, horrible, evil act, in my books, that cancels out every good thing you ever did. And killing your wife and young innocent children basically cancels out everything. No matter what kind of person you were, you're evil now. You're evil. You know, you don't have to agree with me, but I can try to understand this situation, but I cannot have sympathy for this man. He's a bad man. And by the way, it was proven that Kim could not have committed these crimes because with her injuries, she wasn't even able to use a rifle. But still, the media portrayed Kim as this angry, bitter, argumentative wife who drove her husband to do what he did. And people had seen them out and about arguing, which sort of fueled these, I won't say rumors, but this idea that Kim was the bad, evil wife and Jeff had just reached his breaking point and snapped one night and killed everyone. Kim had also reportedly recently told some friends that she was not only not attracted to her husband anymore, but that she was not in love with him anymore. And okay, so get a divorce. That goes for both of them. Like, it sounds like neither of them were happy. So I don't understand why you just wouldn't get a separation. We are going to get a little more into this in just a minute because there was an inquest and that does uncover quite a bit, including attempting to answer the question of why, which I think is the big thing in this case. Why did Jeff do what he did? Of course, he was absolutely struggling in some capacity, as I said, and he obviously hid it very, very well. And of course, we can point to every reason under the sun: stress, financial issues, marital issues. But in the end, depression can affect anyone. And if it's left untreated, the effects can and will be devastating. And although we may never know the full story of what happened on September 8, what we do know from the facts that we have is that it seems like it was not a premeditated killing. We have the fact that Jeff not only made the kids lunches for the following day, suggesting that he did not intend to kill his children, but he had made plans for his week as well. He was planning to go to a tennis game with a friend, and people planning to do what he did surely don't make future plans. But evidently, Jeff did snap that night for one reason or another. And in the last part of this video, we're going to go over the inquest because I think the inquest gives us the most insight into the best explanation as to what happened. So there was actually a bit of pushback at the idea of holding an inquest because, of course, the perpetrator was dead. So some may think, what more is there to say? But I think it's very important to have a why in this case, not only for the Hunt family, but to try and prevent crimes like this from ever happening again. And a case like this, I think, is also really good. I can't think of a better word, but good in the sense that it highlights that we need to be asking particularly men and particularly people that live in rural areas if they are okay, because they're often the people that are struggling but not saying anything. They're bottling it up inside. They're trying to be the man. They're trying to be the leader of the family, and they're not reaching out for help even when they reach this point, which is devastating. So at the inquest, they did have experts come and basically explain what Jeff may have been thinking. And Dr. Sarah Yule was one of these experts, and she has some pretty interesting theories. She did say that Jeff had signs of depression, although I don't know what these signs were, and as he never spoke to anybody and was never officially diagnosed, we can't say for sure if he actually did have depression, but chances are, by the sounds of it, he did. Dr. Yule also said that she believed that Jeff very much did love his family and that his primary motivation that day had been to take his own life. But at the last minute, by the looks of it, the very last minute, he made a decision to kill his wife and kids as well as himself, as Dr. Yule put it, a secondary necessity. So let me explain what I just said. Dr. Yule said that Jeff had pseudo-altruistic intent, which means, and I am taking this definition straight off the National Library of Medicine, because personally I had not heard this term and I don't want to misquote it. It says pseudo-altruism is a pattern of behavior used by people who have a problem in coping satisfactorily with repressed rage. Observed in both individual and group psychotherapy, it allows the discharge of unacceptable impulses through professed concern about others. In other words, Jeff Hunt killed his entire family to, in Dr. Yule's words, save them future pain. How incredibly generous of him. She also added that the use of just a single gunshot wound to each of his victims did imply that he did not want to inflict pain on his wife and kids, but simply wanted to quickly and efficiently put them out of any future misery that he perceived they were going to suffer from. And perhaps in Jeff Hunt's mind, he was truly doing what he thought was the right thing by his family. This line of thinking doesn't absolve him, of course, from what he's done, but it at least does give us some insight into his motivations. It's also worth noting that everything that Dr. Sarah Yule said is from her own professional observations and theories, and even she herself wrapped up by saying that we will never truly know what Jeff Hunt was thinking on the night that he took his own life and his family's. As the inquest concluded, Coroner Michael Barnes stated the following: "What Jeffrey Hunt did was inexcusable, the absolute worst of crimes. It wasn't premeditated, it wasn't motivated by malice or to cover up other wrongs, but it was completely unnecessary. It was a result of an egocentric delusion that his wife and children would be better off dying than living without him. The financial resources and family support that were available to the Hunt family would have readily facilitated a marital separation whereby Jeff could have continued to work the farm, Kim could have continued to work part-time, and both would have extensive contact with the children they so deeply cared for. It is unfathomable why Jeff Hunt would not have actively explored those options before taking the outrageous actions he did," end quote. And quite frankly, I think that statement, that is a perfect summary of what was the most likely scenario, what Jeff was thinking, and it's probably as close to any answers as we're ever going to get in this case. There has unfortunately been a rather similar case to happen since this happened, which I think I will discuss in a future video. But anyway, let me know your thoughts down below on this just shocking case. It's one that's really hard to wrap your head around because they were just a normal family. But anyway, until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.